When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." They were so frightened, they screamed like little girls. At least according to the Common English Bible, with a little paraphrase added on by the pastor. Several years ago, back about 1999, somewhere in then, I had the opportunity to preach in a boat on the Sea of Galilee in Israel. And Reverend Henry had that same opportunity just a few months ago in the same service. It was part of an educational opportunities tour, and Reverend Touchton is preparing one of those tours for this next year. If you're interested, she can tell you about that. I was very excited about that opportunity to preach. I was with a large group of United Methodist pastors and leaders. There was a large group of AME pastors and leaders, Lutherans, Presbyterians, a couple of Baptists, and at least one Church of Christ minister among, a lot of other people. So I was excited to engage that ecumenical type group, but I was also a little nervous. So, when you're preaching before your peers, it kind of raises your anxiety level, at least slightly. But as we were making our way out to where we would stop to hold this service, I started wondering how they were going to hear me, because the engine in that boat was loud. I mean, you couldn't hear the person standing next to you unless they shouted right in your ear. And you know how important it is to hear me when I speak, right? I said, never mind. But anyway, so I was a little nervous, started wondering, now how are they going to hear me? And then we got to the middle of the lake. Captain turned off the engine and dropped the anchor. And it got quiet. It got eerily quiet. And I thought, oh, well, that's how they're going to hear me. And then, by way of introducing the service, one of our guides said, comedian-esque guide, if that's a word, said, "From here, we walk." Our speaker, he didn't even know my name. So, it's a little difficult getting going after that sudden eerie quiet, and then looking at 35, 40 preachers just laughing right in your face, But you know what I noticed? I noticed that not one person took that guide's suggestion. Nobody got out of the boat to see if they could walk. John Ortberg wrote a book a few years back called "If You Want to Walk on the Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat." A lot of us have used that in Sunday school classes and read it devotionally. It's a great book. Ortberg is a great author, great preacher, great leader in the church, leads a lot of conferences and things, but not meaning any disrespect to John Ortberg or the writer of the anthem we heard, here's what I wonder about when I hear the title of that book. If you want to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. Who in their right mind wants to walk on water? Who in their right mind wants to walk on water? You see, science has documented that there is such a thing as a messianic complex. There are some things that maybe we should just leave up to the good Lord. Think about it like this. Who can you think of that talked about following Jesus as much or more than anybody else? Oh, I don't know. Let's see. How about the Apostle Paul? Right? Apostle Paul talks about following Jesus a lot, doesn't he? In detail. How many times was the Apostle Paul shipwrecked? Malta, the GNC, lots of times, right? But you know what you never read? You never read about Paul saying, well, we're shipwrecked again. Y'all can do what you want to do. I'm just going to walk back to shore because that's what Jesus would do. Not once. Never. There's some things that we should probably just leave up to Jesus, and maybe walking on water is one of them. I heard a similar story one time about the Archbishop of Canterbury, an allegedly true story. Archbishop of Canterbury boarded a train over in England. At the same time, there was an outing from the psychological unit of a hospital. And the director of that group was making sure that he had all of the residents back on the train. So he was counting 36, 37, 38. He pointed to the Archbishop of Canterbury. He said, who are you? He said, Archbishop of Canterbury. He said, 39, 40. You know, if you go around saying you're the Archbishop of Canterbury or that you want to walk on water, you know, people may kind of have some concerns about you. But at one level of interpretation, anyway, this story that we've just heard read is a story about you and me. It's a story about us. Because you know what? Sometimes we strain at the oars, don't we? Out there on that sea. Sometimes we feel the wind blowing. Sometimes we know what it's like to have those waves crashing in on our boat, to hear the lightning, the thunder rolling, and to be in that kind of scary, scary darkness. And yet, we try to do the best we can to be good people, right? To be the best person we can be, to make a difference in this world. And we train to do that. We're educated. We're skilled. Just like Simon Peter and the rest of those disciples in that boat, they were skilled fishermen. That wasn't their first boat ride across the Sea of Galilee. They knew what they were doing. And we train to do what we do, and yet sometimes the results are just mixed and ambiguous. For example, we can devise machines, we can invent machines for war. And if you've watched the news lately, they're pretty glorious, aren't they? But we just don't seem to be very good at creating machines for peace, are we? Or we create an invention that enables us to hear the song of a whale beneath fathomless depths of ocean. And yet we can't hear the distressing cry of our neighbor 1 block away, 2 blocks away, who still don't have what they need for school, who still are going to go hungry sometimes. The wind and the waves and the lightning and the thunder can sometimes keep us from seeing the one who has come to save us, even though he's right there. Think of the disciples there in verse 25, verse 26. It says, they were so frightened, they screamed. Jesus was just a few feet away from him. They knew the sound of Jesus' voice, right? They had heard him preach. They'd listened to him pray. They had seen him walk hundreds of miles along trails all over Palestine. But they could not recognize the one who came to save them. And they were with him all the time. Where does that leave us? How do we know when Jesus is with us? How do we know when Jesus has shown up and is present with us? Well, one thing we can do is read, which I just did yesterday for my devotional time, read through the letter of the Colossians. That'll help you a lot. But I want to touch on one way we can know that Christ is with us, and it's how he takes away our fear. We sing a song down at the mission. We sing it at other places too, but we sing it down at the mission a lot. And it's called Wave on Wave. I've tweaked the words a little bit, but I love that song because it reminds me and makes real to me two very formative experiences in my life. One is when I was about 10 years old and I was with my best friend Mike Hesse in the woods behind our house, my house. He actually lived on the other side of the woods. We were out playing in the woods, and there's a creek that ran alongside, and we decided we needed to cross that creek. We'd done it a lot of times, and there's a tall tree that had fallen over the stream. So we were just going to shimmy across the tree. And I decided to go all full out Jungle Book. And by the way, Nancy mentioned watching cartoons. It's kind of like when you see cartoons, you have to remember what they tell you on some of those other shows. Don't try this at home, okay? So I decided I'm going to go full out Jungle Book, and I'm going to go across just holding on by my arms and my legs. What I found out when I got about to the middle of that creek, Alan, I'm no Mowgli. You know, I wasn't raised by orangutans. I'm sorry. So I fell right in the middle of the creek. Splash. And I couldn't swim, and it was deep. And I kept going under, and I'd come back up, and then I'd go under for a little bit longer. And just before Mike was able to get a big old long limb and you know, get it out to me from the side of the creek, I thought I was gonna die. I mean, no joking, no kidding, thought I was gonna die. And in the same instant, I felt that fear and the realization of my finitude. I felt a peace and a presence I cannot explain, and I'll never be able to get away from. So that song reminds me of that experience every time we sing it. That's going through my head. Then another experience, Jordan, that song reminds me of, believe it or not, is my baptism. Out in Percy Priest Lake by a preacher about this tall. He was about 5'2", I'm 6'2", and as we were going out in the water, we hit a hole. And I ended up dunking him. I think it was a foreshadowing of things to come. You're going to be a preacher someday. You just baptize somebody at your own baptism. But the song reminds me of that experience, particularly the words where it says, I wandered out into the water, and I thought that I might drown. You know, part of baptism is being buried and raised again with Christ, right? I wandered out into the water, and I thought that I might drown. Don't know what I was after. Just know that I was going down. That's where you found me. I'm not afraid anymore. Your love came to me, and you said, son, have you found what you've been looking for? And it came upon me wave on wave. You're the reason I'm still here today. I'm just one you came to save. And it came upon me wave on wave. The clouds broke, And the angel cried, "You don't have to walk alone. I'm so glad you came my way." And it came upon me, wave on wave. We're not going to find what we're looking for in the wind or the waves or the lightning or the thunder, but by the one who can walk on water, who picks us up when we fall and says, "Do not be afraid. It is I. Take courage." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.